welcome to Tuku Talks. We are a podcast where we talk about shit that matters to rangatahi. We are currently sitting in the boots of our cars with a chili bin, having a bit of a drink, having a chill time, and having chats about shit that matters. My name's Janaye Henry.
And I'm Turia Schmidt-Piquet, and yep, we are in a car park, so if you hear planes, cars, gravel, a cough or anything, yep, it is what it is. It's a very organic show. Enjoy.
Today, the kaupapa, we're going to be talking about the queer community, queerness. I'm excited, I can't wait. We have got a powerhouse of a guest. We've absolutely nailed it. Honestly, almost needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway because it's polite. Today, welcome to the boot. We've got Shaneel Lal.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Well, you've said my name, so I don't have to say it. Well, kia ora, I am Shaneel Lal. My pronouns are they, them. I am Fijian and Indian, and I'm queer.
I love that. Thank you for letting me know I'm also queer.
Yeah.
I didn't do my pronouns. She, her.
She, her.
There we go. Now we're all caught up.
I have those obvious.
I know there's lots of different opinions about sort of labels in the queer community. I'm jumping right in.
Yeah.
For the sake of this, are there any sort of labels you want to throw on the table? So for me, I identify as queer and takatapui. I struggled to nail down the specifics of it. I said bisexual for many years. Bi means like two in Latin, some fun language. And so it felt a bit exclusive as I got older, and then I moved to pansexual, and then my family are like, prove it, you never date men. And that's true. So I sort of pansexual. Pan means
For our
all.
viewers that don't know, pansexual, all.
Yeah, in Latin, pan, like the
Oh,
word pan
yeah.
means all, so it's just like,
Like-
whoever.
Like non-binary, he, she. Oh.
Yeah, all of the things. But yeah, these days I think I'm a lesbian in denial, maybe. I don't really know. But I'm not stressed by it. So I
Yeah.
just go by queer or takatapui, something that will make your like auntie uncomfortable at the Christmas dinner table, basically.
You love it, eh?
Yeah, but for the sake of labels, what do you go by? What clicks for you?
Yeah, I mean, for many years you identify as asexual when you're gay.
Yeah.
And then you're finally like, hell no. But, I mean, early years when I was probably 18, I'd probably have identified as a gay man, and then later I realised that I wasn't really a man. And then I identified as trans non-binary for a while, and then I moved to the use of the term queer. But I just don't identify with the LGBTQIA+ framework of queerness, because I think it's a very Western, white, colonial understanding of queerness.
Yes.
And see, the way that I understand is that prior to colonization, Indigenous people were queer. Queerness was integral to Indigenous communities, and then colonization kind of stripped away our diverse sexualities and genders. So colonization was stripping away our diverse sexualities and genders, and neocolonialism is imposing white queer identities onto Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
So,
The labels.
I mean, my people are Vakasa Lewa Lewa, my people are Hijra, my people are all of these other things, but there's no V in LGBTQIA+.
Yeah.
So I feel as though those Indigenous queer identities have been rendered invisible by the colonial framework of queerness.
Ooh, good
And
at all.
Yeah, come on.
Oh.
So that colonial understanding of queerness just privileges white queer identities, and I just haven't really identified with those terms. I think
Yeah.
the word queer I use just for conversation, but normally I would identify as Vakasa Lewa Lewa and Hijra, and I think those two identities need to be developed further.
Lovely. I think you're right. A lot is shoved under that plus in the
Yeah.
LGBTQIA. It's like the get out of jail for free card. They're like, chuck a plus on it.
Yeah.
I'm like, well then why even bother doing all that? Do L plus if you're going to be that lazy. Throw a plus in. How do you identify, Turia?
Well, Tōtika, straight. I feel like I'm boring now. Like,
Yeah, no, I reckon.
Yeah.
please, who knows?
Heterosexual.
Heterosexual, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
You
going to be
know,
honest,
yeah.
I don't know much about terminology. Like, I was kind of sweating balls that we were going to talk to you, just because I don't want to offend anyone, and I feel like that's a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, with heterosexuality, I mean, I guess I can accept you as a person, but I just don't understand the lifestyle, you know?
Oh,
Yeah.
like just reading dudes, you don't...
Yeah.
I can't,
I see.
like, This is such a bizarre question. I feel like we're doing a 180. Like, how do you know you're straight? I believe you, and I
mean,
trust
like,
you.
I've kissed a chick for like on dramas, like only on a drama scene, and like, I don't know, I've seen like, you look at chicks, like I don't look at, I'm just using chicks. I find guys sexually attractive. I don't find girls sexual. I find girls beautiful, trans women, beautiful, non-binary, I know a few, but nah, I'm just dudes, I don't know. Maybe that has a lot to do with upbringing, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't.
Does it? Or does it not?
I don't think so.
That's a great question. What's
Like-
your whakaaro on that?
I don't think that sexuality is something you can change based on how people... I feel like people are born as they are, however, it is your environment that allows you to express who you are.
Yeah.
So a lot of queer people do grow up in, say, homes that are not accepting of who they are. So they grow up and live as non-queer people because living as queer people is just not an option for them.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of my friends who came out later in life when they moved out of their home because their parents were suppressing their queer identity. So I do think environment does influence how people express who they are, but it doesn't
Yes.
necessarily who they are at the core.
I reckon that's also role modelling too, like the people you see, because I grew up in Tauranga Moana, shout outs, and the version of like queerness in women I was seeing there was sort of like the more stereotypical butch lesbians in like puffer vests, which go off. I love that community, but it's not me. It's like, it's quite butch, and I was like, well, I can't be queer because I like dresses and makeup, so I must be straight. And then I went to Wellington, the classic story. I went to Wellington.
Land
and,
of the free.
Yeah, and then I met like hot lesbians, and I was like, I'm there.
Yeah.
This is it. This is the dream.
We'll say like, bro, hey bro, like, hey sis. Or,
yeah,
nah.
I mean,
like, are there any kind of
feel like-
language you're not keen on?
So I think with pronouns, when you're talking to, for example, a stranger, I would prefer, well, not even prefer, I would want them to use my pronouns, which are they, them. But in the queer community, almost everyone is a she. So
Yeah.
you refer to almost all people as she, and you refer to almost all people as sisters.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a part of being in the community. But obviously, there are terms like bro and dude, which a lot of non-binary people don't want to be referred to. I personally do not mind, and I think I'm just not surrounded by people who use that terminology, so I've never had to think about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I often get called like diva and doll and princess, and none of these things bother me either. But obviously, I am quite feminine, so I guess I do align myself more to a doll than to a bro.
Yeah, because I was just about to be like, I don't want anyone calling me princess, but I
Yeah,
would like
yeah.
bro, so
Yeah, and I feel like that's the thing, that a lot of people, even when they're not trans or non-binary, a lot of cisgender people also don't align themselves with their stereotypical gender terms. So there are lots
Yeah.
of guys, cisgender gay men, who don't like being called bro, and there are a lot of cisgender women who don't like being called princess and cis.
Cisgender.
Cisgender is, well, cisgender is when you keep the gender identity that was given to you by other people at birth. So if you were born and your parents were like, oh, that's a girl, and now you still identify as she, her, so that's cisgender.
Oh,
Whereas
right.
trans people, as for example, I was at birth given he, him pronouns and the gender boy. However, now I don't identify as a boy, I identify as non-binary. So that qualifies me as trans.
Yeah.
So trans is just an umbrella term for people who don't identify with the gender that was given to them at birth.
So you can be trans and not cis, say, like you don't acknowledge that you were ever a boy. Is
Yeah,
that what?
so I think for a lot of people, a lot of the times they realize that they're trans quite early in their life, but because their community is so transphobic that they aren't able to accept themselves,
Yeah.
so they go through their entire lives as identifying as their cisgender identity, but then later in life they have a breakthrough and they're like, no, you know what, this is enough, I'm going to identify as who I am, and I'm not going to tolerate anyone calling me by my cisgender or my
Yeah.
dead pronouns, my dead name. Dead names and dead pronouns are just like things that you were called and referred to as before you transitioned. But then there's lots of non-binary people who also identify with he and she pronouns. So you could find people who identify with he, him, and they, them, or she, her, and they, them. And there are a lot of people who identify with all pronouns. And I think what's important is to not fixate on other people's identity and just respect who they are. Like, for me, it's
Yeah.
as simple as that. If someone tells me, call me she, her, That's all I need to know. There's no need for me to interrogate that.
Yeah.
I love that.
I was.
Yeah, I
That
was
is-
really. I was very intimidated to talk to you, but yeah, no, okay. I love that now. I was honestly stressing out. Hey, we were getting our makeup done today, and I was like, oh, anesthesia, like they. I was like, yes, I need that. But because I feel like there's heaps of people who have actually wanted to ask,
Yeah.
but not sure how to approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it always really comes, it's really interesting when people ask questions because obviously there's a lot of fear around asking trans people about their gender identity and their names because of cancel culture. But I think you'd find that there are more trans people actually quite desperate to have those conversations with cis people and educate them so that they don't have to do that over and over again. I
Yeah.
think the more cis people that I educate, the less that I will have to do in the future, because then those cis people go and educate their friends and they go and, it's just a 3-3-3-3 kind of effect.
You're 22, right?
I turned 22 this
That-
year.
Right.
Yes.
2000.
Yeah.
What a year to be born.
I mean, they said that like 20s are your best years, but my 20s started with a global pandemic, war is raging, we had that 2 terrorist attack. I mean, you're telling me it gets worse?
No, I think for you, like you're 22 and you're already like holding people accountable. You've got grown adults trying to sue you. Do you know what I mean? You're fighting Helen Clark on Twitter. I'm there favoriting the tweets. Like you're doing so much that I'm like, for you, your 20s.
Did you say favoriting?
Yeah, I was favoriting your tweets.
What is favoriting the
Must
tweet?
be like a heart.
Oh, does that make me sound old? I pressed the heart. What's that called?
Liking.
No. In my day, it was called favourite.
Favoriting.
I've been on
mine
Twitter
was
for 12
Twitter.
years.
Intergenerational healing, I guess.
I'm your generation. I'm your generation. I think, in a way, being queer's aged me. I feel
I mean,
older
it
than I
forces you
am.
to grow up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got a lot to fight against more. Well,
Yeah.
the more minority groups you're in, the more fight you have to put out and the more you learn, I guess.
I actually feel out of all of my identities, like cis woman, Māori, and queer, for me personally, navigating queerness was like the easiest one because my whānau were really chill about it. So for me, it wasn't a big fight. I like did a really dramatic, came home from Wellington one weekend at dinner table, really dramatic.
Let's go.
And I was like, I need to tell you something. And then Mum was like, pregnant, she's pregnant, she's pregnant. And I was like, very different to pregnant. I'm definitely not pregnant. And I was like, I'm dating someone. And then I was like, it's, and then Dad was like, woman. I was like, okay, complete the sentence. Ruined my moment.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, sweet. And they took a little bit of time to like readjust what their imagined future for me was.
Oh,
But I've-
Moko Central.
Yeah, Moko Central, but I was like, gee, I didn't want kids anyway. Like, when was that ever happening?
On the table.
Yeah, but I think, for me it was quite chill and easy, but I know that's definitely not
The case for everyone.
everyone's experiences.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
Well, let me just deflect this. Did you ever have to come out, or have you considered ever coming out as heterosexual?
No, actually, I guess like everyone kind of looks at a person like, yeah, you're straight until they announce something. I guess so, sometimes.
So that was going to lead me to my answer, and that is that I often think that people assume that heterosexuality is kind of the default.
Yeah.
So which is why heterosexual people don't kind of feel that they need to come out, or other people don't put pressure on them to come out. So I often think that my sister just brought a boy home and she never had to announce her sexuality, so why do I have to do that?
Oh, I love that.
So I never came out in the traditional sense, right?
Yeah.
But then you just think about, like, I've always treated my brownness the same way as I've treated my queerness. They're just
Yeah.
both two natural parts of who
Yeah.
I am, right?
Yeah.
Now imagine this, I set my mum down and I'm like, Mum, Dad, I hope you still love me. I'm brown.
Yeah.
And then my mum would go, Jesus, anything but brown, give him cancer. Anything but brown, diabetes, I don't know, a heart attack. You know, it's just kind of ridiculous when you
Yeah.
think about it like that.
When you
just-
read it like that,
yeah.
it is.
So I never thought that I had to explain my queerness to anyone.
Oh, I love that.
But I must say that I am fully aware that most of our parents would have grown up in a time where they were conditioned with homophobia and transphobia. So this is just the environment that they grew up in.
Yeah.
So they do require that extra understanding
Yeah.
and education and support to come around. And I just haven't been, I guess, empathetic enough to do that, educating for them. I think because I was, from a very early age, I was so busy kind of fighting for myself, because I grew up in Fiji. Fiji decriminalized homosexuality when I was 10 years old.
Oh.
So I was consciously aware that I was gay and that it was a crime to be gay. So I knew I was a criminal for most of my, 10 years of my
childhood.
first, So I was really busy and fixated on protecting myself and keeping myself safe, and so I never was able to extend that education and empathy to people beyond myself, because there was just no time, there were no resources. I do remember there was a trans woman in my village, and she was a dancer, she was an entertainer. And in part of Fijian culture is that when there's a wedding, you almost always have a dancer and entertainer. So she would be paid to come and dance at weddings.
Yes.
And people loved her, they adored her, they gave her money, they wanted to basically be her in that moment.
Yeah.
But outside those dancing events, children and people would like spit on her from the bus in ordinary day-to-day life, and that was really conflicting to me, is that how could you love and accept a queer person so much in one space when they were existing for your entertainment, but when they were existing for themselves, living their life, you hated them, you despised them. And for me it was a message that if you're going to live as you really are, as your authentic self, you have to put up with this. You have to put up with this kind of abuse, because this is the future for you in a country like Fiji.
Yeah, that just by existing and being, so many people who you won't even fully know the scope of will be seeing you as a role model and seeing someone, can we just say literally in vogue? You were in vogue!
That dress.
Vogue!
I mean, you know, those really big things like Vogue, they make me happy momentarily, right? They make me happy, and then I'm like, oh, I was in Vogue. Like now it's just like I was in Vogue.
Yeah.
But things that have really stayed with me is that recently a young person messaged me and they were like, oh, I came out to my parents because of like you. And my parents have accepted me. And then like I heard like from a mum who is like a mother to a trans daughter, and she's like, oh, like your account has really helped me accept my child. And I think it's really those small things, those lives that you touch, that matter much more than being in Vogue or being on Vice World. And now just throwing in the things that I've
Throw
been.
them away. I want another one. I want
But,
another one. Vogue, Vice World. Give me
I mean,
another.
I have been on Parliament TV,
Parliament
given that
Yes, I've seen
speech. I've been on almost any mainstream media that you can name in New Zealand.
Yeah.
But like, those
and now
things
Tuku Talks, the
now
best
this,
and biggest in Aotearoa.
And like all of these things, I think are important because of the impact they have on everyday real people. Yeah, and I think a lot of activists or people who have platforms kind of lose sight of who they serve.
Yeah,
Yes.
hard out. Yeah, let's talk about cancel culture for a second.
Yeah.
You've touched on it. What would you sort of describe as cancel culture?
I really don't think there's anything such as cancel culture. I think there's an accountability culture, there's a consequence culture.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are just being held accountable
Yeah.
for their behavior. These are the consequences of your actions. And I think what's really important is that we need to recognize that this thing, this concept that is known as cancel culture, has existed for years. It existed in the time of slavery, it existed in the time of colonization. So the status quo is maintained by this idea of civility and decorum.
Yeah.
Right? So cisgender heterosexual white men, they are in power, and anyone who retaliates against the status quo is labeled unkind, uncivil, unable to maintain decorum. And as soon as a marginalized person is given all of those labels in a colonial system, they immediately lose their power.
Yeah.
But there was nothing civil or kind or decorum-like about how cisgender heterosexual white men have come into power. There was nothing kind about murder. There was nothing civil about rape. There was nothing decorum-like about colonization. So what's really happened is that cisgender heterosexual white men have used all of these unkind things to come into power and now cancel anyone else that uses those same
Yeah.
practices
Yeah.
to retaliate against the status quo. And I think anyone who refuses to play by their rules is just refused to be able to play. And
To be a part of
yeah,
the
so
society,
cancel
yeah.
culture is only really something that people are upset about when it applies to privileged people. But
Yeah.
throughout history, it's applied to marginalized people, and no one's had a problem with it.
Wow. That
Well,
was-
what do you
Oh,
think?
no.
What do you think? I mean, that's just my opinion.
I think to bring cancel culture back to modern day and kind of like what it looks like at the moment, where we're at with cancel culture, is it looks like usually an Instagram or a Twitter sort of like ripping on someone or like piling on, or I guess it can be thought of as accountability, as you said, and sometimes it is fully that. I think my only worry is now that we're getting to a point where this fear of cancel culture, be it what it's called, I think sometimes is stopping people from learning.
Yeah.
Like how we talked about how like this morning you said that you were like whakama and like a little bit nervous
Yeah.
because you didn't want to get it wrong. And I'm like, that fear of being cancelled is actually stopping people
Yep.
from learning. And I like to sort of think like there's a call out, there is a time to call people out
Yeah.
and be like, wait, nah. But I think there's also a time to call people in and be like, actually, like you just need to learn. I think a lot of it comes down to like the heart of a person and the intention.
And the intention.
That's why I wasn't
That's-
worried for you, because I was like, you're a cool person
I
with
was
a good
legit
heart.
sweating balls, man.
Yeah.
Shipping out.
But you like
Let's
people.
stop these words.
But you know, I agree with you. I think I think what we need to recognize is that a lot of the times people who are messing up are quite privileged people with all resources available to them.
Yeah.
And they just have not made an effort to use those resources. And I think it's quite violent to expect marginalized people to call people in when they are the people bearing the brunt of, say, homophobia or transphobia or racism.
Fully.
Yeah, so I think it gets more nuanced, as you were saying, where how do we allow people to learn? And I think we need to
Yeah.
recognize that if someone has all the resources and they've just chosen not to access them, then that's a matter of ignorance over unwillingness to learn. And some people do deserve a bit of a whiplash.
Oh, fully.
Yeah.
And I do want to say that on the record now, like some people have been quote unquote cancelled. I've been there pressing cancel. I'm like, yeah, get him. Because I do think while I do think there is a time to call people in, I'm thinking specifically about like rangatahi who are like 13 and 14 saying the most random shit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you still have space to learn, but I agree that when
Yeah.
someone has access, someone else's lived experiences and like lived trauma and hardships, like you don't owe anyone your story or education for free.
Yeah.
So it is a balancing act, and I do want to be clear about that, because I definitely, there's some people that I'm trying to cancel still, you know.
Nah.
They know who they
Have
are.
you cancelled anyone?
I cancelled
Yes.
all of North Shore, so
You've held people accountable for sure.
I do think that I've been reasonable.
I think you're right when you called them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I do take. So often I will approach people privately and say what you've done is wrong and this is why it's wrong and you should correct your behavior.
Yeah.
But it's very rare for people to respond to that positively, and often they will say, oh, who the hell do you think you are? And
You're
I'm
like,
like, I'll
Google
show
it.
you.
You should
I'll show you
Google
who
me.
I am, and then I show them who I am, and
Yeah.
and then they don't like that. I mean, I
Powerful.
do remember when I called out North Shore during the time that they were having parties in a lockdown.
As you should.
Yeah,
No.
and they went to the police, and the police called me and said, hey, you should take those videos down because these people are getting hatred. And I was like, you see how these different standards apply to
Yeah.
brown people
Yeah.
and white people. When white, rich, privileged kids were breaking lockdown rules and partying, there was absolutely no consequence for them.
Yeah.
Whereas the police show up to brown kids just riding their bicycles in South Auckland. And
Yeah.
and you just wonder that, you know, these rules that are supposedly are there to protect all people don't actually do that. And so sometimes we have to put ourselves at the front to apply the justice system equally to these people.
Yeah. You're so good at like
Yeah.
getting in there and doing the
articulating,
mahi, getting
yeah.
stuff done. I love to see it.
I think sometimes you know, if you're on the internet and you've got a big platform, you need to be well researched, because the worst thing you can do is go out there and say things and be sued for defamation.
Defamation's quite easily avoidable if it's an honestly held opinion.
Well,
That's
it
my
really
loophole.
depends if you really honestly hold that opinion. 'cause
Have you
a lo-
been sued before? Have you? Is it? Hey, yeah, you don't have to mention names. That's a yes.
I have come very close to being sued twice.
Yeah.
There. That means you're onto something.
For those who don't know about the mahi you did around banning conversion therapy, can you speak to that briefly?
Yeah. Well, conversion therapy really is any practice that aims to change a queer person to being non-queer or being cisgender and heterosexual. I mean, in the past, they used practices like electroconvulsive therapy, which includes shocking people to change them from being queer to non-queer. Joan Bellingham grew up wanting to be a nurse, but when the word got out that she was a lesbian, she was taken to the Princess Margaret Hospital in Christchurch, not as a nurse but as a patient. In her time at the hospital, she was falsely diagnosed with a neurotic personality disorder and given 200 electric shocks. She says that the headaches made her want to die, and the electric shocks felt like razor blades going through her body. She's 70 years old now. She's still a lesbian, but she says that she ended up hating herself. Conversion therapy isn't therapy at all. It is torture. Frankly, it is junk science. Others have turned to practices like psychoanalysis, where they sit a queer person down with a medical professional, and the medical professional tells a young person that your queerness can absolutely be changed. Then there's practices like evasion therapy, which is snapping yourself with a rubber band every time you have a queer thought. And the goal here is to...
I've seen that.
Yeah, so every time you think of something queer, you snap yourself with a rubber band.
I'd be snapping non-stop.
Yeah. Well, the goal really is to associate your queerness with pain.
With pain, yeah.
And so when you accept that you're queer, that's a punishment in itself. Obviously, one of the biggest breeding grounds for conversion therapy are religious extremists.
Yeah.
This is what they call pray the gay away, and we knew that conversion therapy was very prevalent in religious communities because of the kind of opposition that we saw from the religious community when we tried to ban conversion therapy. There's a story of a young person named Chris who was introduced to conversion therapy when he was 16 years old, and he said he prayed to God to heal him or kill him, to heal him or kill him. Like, make no mistake, conversion therapy is not about praying the gay away or fixing the trans. It is about psychologically and physically torturing the most vulnerable people to death. I mean, so when I was growing up in Fiji, of course, my grandparents were very well-respected people in the village because they were the head of the temple. They were basically the people that everyone came to for advice and all of other things like cooking at their wedding and singing at their wedding, etc., etc. So they were very well respected. But everyone knew that I was queer before I did, because I was obviously a very feminine child, and there were no words in my vocabulary to describe myself other than the derogatory terms. So my identity was taboo. But slowly, as I was growing up, my identity started to hurt my grandparents' reputation. So the years of service that they had given to the community meant absolutely nothing if they accepted me as a queer person. Fiji is a very collective community, which means that everyone takes care of everyone's children. You give birth to a child, that's not just your child anymore, it's the community's child. And so soon the elders of the village would take advantage of that collective nature of our community and try to pray my queerness away. And that collective nature of my community hid my conversion therapy from my immediate family, like my parents and my grandparents. And so it was like wearing enchanted bracelets to rid you of your evil spirits, and keeping me away from the girls so I didn't become more queerer, or keeping me away from the boys so that my queerness didn't spread to them. So if my queerness wasn't treated like an evil spirit, it was treated like a virus. And I think that experience of conversion therapy wasn't really meant to change me. It was about isolating me and crushing me to the point where I just submitted to those elders. So a lot of queer people go into conversion therapy wanting to change, right? Because my church leaders told me that I would be disowned by my family, banished from my community, and I would go to hell. So as a young person, I wanted to change because I did not want any of those things for myself. So you go into conversion therapy wanting to change, but you know it's not working. And so now you know that all of those things, like going to hell and being disowned and being banished, will be true. So you get to a space where you think that, is it still worth living? And I think I feel like every story that I've heard of conversion therapy ends with a queer person questioning whether it's still worth living.
Yeah.
I mean, I am lucky I chose to stay, but there are so many who don't. And that is why ending conversion therapy was so important to me. So I was in 2017, summer of 2017, volunteering at the Middlemore Hospital when a church leader walked up to me and offered to pray my gay away. I refused. So he looked at me and he said, it's hot, but do you know what's hotter? Hell.
Ugh.
I mean, at the age of 17, this idea of going to hell was quite scary.
Yeah.
But now at 22, going to hell makes perfect sense with my fantasy.
Yeah, that little Nas music video.
Riding the devil.
I mean, if all queer people are going to hell, that's where I want to be.
Yeah.
I
That's
want to be
pride.
with my people. It's going to be a ball.
Pride parade.
So in 2018, I was selected as a youth MP for Jenny Salesa. In 2019, I went to Youth Parliament and called for a ban in conversion therapy. Then I founded the Conversion Therapy Action Group with 4 other people, and the activism started in 2020. We made the Labour Party commit to banning conversion therapy. In 2021, the government released the bill, and I mean, we were up against some of the biggest churches in New Zealand who wanted to keep conversion therapy legal. But in 2022, we won the fight. We banned conversion therapy, and you know what? A lot of these religious extremists will come out and say that they won't come out and say that they're homophobic. So these people are forced to look for answers like, in the same book that says snakes can talk, says homosexuality is a sin. Or that traditionally marriage was between a man and a woman. Well, traditionally voting was between white men and the government. Things have changed, and so should we.
I think keeping tradition for tradition's sake is always like an awful argument. I'm like, well, we're moving.
Yeah,
I think the mahi you did around conversion therapy was so amazing, and of course literally life-changing, because like you, every story I've heard about conversion therapy,
Horrific.
yeah, it's like, you can't put someone in a room and tell them who they should and shouldn't love. Like, of course it's just going to end in the darkest place. And I think when you boil it down, it's like, why are you so like dusty and crusty and caring that much about who people love? Like, get a grip. Like, what's going on for you that it's like such a personal issue? I'm like, let's like loosen up. Like, do you need a hug? Like, what is actually going on for you? 'Cause it's not right.
I mean, the question that I often ask heterosexual people is that after your partner dies, will you still love them? And often they say, yeah, of course I love my partner. Like, they were my partner for life.
I think my answer was going to be no to that. I was like, no, move
Well,
on.
I'm talking about heterosexual people here.
Yeah, different for me, different for me.
I mean, like, often you ask, like, old people that if they still love their dead partner.
Oh, yeah.
And often they say, yes, I love my partner. They were my partner for life. And then you say, well, there's no body left to have sex with, but you still love this person. So you
Yeah.
agree that it's not about sex. It's
Yeah.
not about the physical things that you do together. It's about the connection and the love that you share between each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it comes down to, is that a lot of like these people love their dead partners. And I mean, so that just kind of proves that it's not about the physical body.
Yeah.
It's about the emotional connection that you share with that person.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be crystal clear, they're emotionally loving their dead partners. Only emotionally are they loving their dead partners.
So you banned conversion therapy.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, like
the
you-
government did, but
yeah.
I made them do
I
it.
mean-
But I mean, would it have happened?
No.
No.
Like, I even signed it, and I remember you like working overtime to get like people on. You had the Drive, Google Drive going.
Yeah.
Like, no, I looked at my thing. I was like, oh my god, you are.
Yeah.
But no, so you banned. You know, you're just doing so much, like for everyone else. Like, who's Shaneel? Like, what you're at university at the moment? Like,
I mean, the thing that I would say about that movement was that banning conversion therapy was probably one of the most lonely things that I've done.
Oh.
Because it just fell on my shoulders at so many different times, is that
Yeah.
politicians were coming in and doing the media opportunities and just throwing things on their Instagram and taking credit for a lot of the work that they didn't do.
Yeah.
But at the ground level, there was no support from politicians, and a lot of the personalities that you saw in the media weren't actually doing any work. So it just fell on my shoulders, and sometimes I would be up at 3 a.m. and I'd be like, this is so depressing.
Yeah.
But then I also could not trust anyone else to do that work. If I stopped, it would have stalled. And so I just kept going. And when conversion therapy was banned, I just hit a wall. I had a meltdown because suddenly, I mean, my entire livelihood had revolved around banning conversion therapy, and now it was done. And now I had to sit with my emotions for the first time in my entire life, and these were like not very good emotions, and I was like, oh Lord, like it's just been, this entire process has been so isolating, so lonely. And when I go onto the social medias, everyone just loves me so much, and then in my personal life I'm like, oh my God, how could I just not, how does that love from other people not translate to me loving myself in my personal life? And I think that's what I have been working on in my personal life, is that just trying to step back from that activist space that has drained the life and energy out of me. But yeah, so I'm focusing, of course, on completing my degree at the University of Auckland. I study law and psychology, which are, I mean, you just got to learn the master's game to play it.
I love it, yeah.
I wish people in the government, I'm hitting that cancel button that I was talking about before.
Yeah.
I wish people in the government and wider, like, I wish people did their job so you got to have a single day of rest ever. Because you're 22 and doing so much, and then there's people who are like so-called experts and getting paid big dollars doing the absolute bare minimum. And I'm over it. All right, well, on that,
On that note,
on that, I'm absolutely sweating buckets. It's been so lovely to talk to you, and I've learned heaps. I don't know about you, Turia.
Yeah, I feel like people a lot like me, you know, all your Kura graduates were very sheltered. I feel like I've learned heaps, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Especially I feel like we got like the
It was a
top
joy.
Of
It was a joy talking to the two of you. Thank you.
Thank you for being so gracious with your education, your knowledge, and your time. And also, I really hope in like 5 years when we're catching up, I hope you're just chilling. I hope you get a single day off in a week.
That's my wildest dream. My wildest dream is to rest, and we shall get there.
One day. It's been lovely. Thank you so much for joining us on Tuku Talks. I've been Janaye Henry.
I'm Turia Schmidt-Pickett.
And I'm Shaneel Lal.